When we talk about the slope of a line, we're talking about the rate of increase, how much it went up and how long it took it, the rise over the run. Well, there's a formula for that, which is pretty straightforward. It says you subtract the second y minus the first y over you subtract the second x minus the first x. It doesn't really matter which point you call the first or second. Typically we call that the second one. So in terms of the second point, I have to have the y on top and the x on bottom, the y on top and the x on bottom, and I'm going to subtract the y on top, the x on bottom, the y on top, the x on bottom. And of course we know that minus and negative is the same thing as plus, and I get negative 10/3. Remember the formula. We're going to subtract the y's over subtract the x's, and if you were good at doing this in high school, keep doing it that way in high school. If you were not, let's see if we can do a little different way. I have to put the y's on top, so the 5 goes on top and the negative 3 goes on the bottom. Put the y's on top and the x on bottom, and what do you do with those x's and y's? You subtract them. Now we know that minus a negative is plus a positive, so my slope is negative 3/2, or 3 over negative 2. Typically I put the negative on top, but all three of those are the same answer. Alright, now we're going to have this problem where we have to plug that value into a fraction, and I relate this to the slope because slopes are fractions. So I'm going to replace the x with a 7 and figure out what that value is. If I replace the x with a 7, that becomes 35 over 3, if you think of it as 7 over 1. Now the problem says to write as the sum of two fractions with a common denominator and simplify. So this one's got to be, I can tell just by looking that all my problems have to be, all my terms have to be over 3. Something over 3, something over 3 equals something over 3. And when I substitute a 7 in there, I got 35 over 3. Now because the 4 is a constant, doesn't have anything to do with x, whatever number I put on top here, my answer has to still be 4. And I'm thinking to myself, what number can I put on top so that when I divide it by 3, I get 4? Well, the answer to the question of what did I divide by is to multiply back. That number is 4, 12 over 3. It's still a 4, but it looks different. And I got a minus in between them. And there's your solution. Be sure and show the sum of fractions with a common denominator. Don't just give me 23/3. Show the fractions. Once again, the only denominator I have is 2. So I'm going to write as the sum of two fractions with a common denominator. Everything's got to be over 2. And simplify equals something over 2. Now when you plug a 3 into here, you get 15 over 2. The 7 is a constant, does not have an x involved, so it doesn't matter what x is, this number is still 7. This number has to be 7. And the answer to the question is what did I divide by to get 7 is, multiply it back, 14. That is 7, it just looks different. I got a minus in between them. There you go, and I hope that helps.